Welcome to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, the podcast where we take questions I've been asked in the past from so many different roles, along with questions you'll ask and we'll ask together to, learn. Along the way, we'll build our capacity to become a community of problem solvers. I'm your host, Janice Case. Let's get to it, shall we? All right, welcome to episode 4, everyone. Somebody asked me, probably about a year ago, if I had read Claudia Chan's book, This Is How We Rise. It was a recommendation through my coaching role with the Faster Way to Fat Loss, and at the time, my answer was no. But after a quick overview, I was certainly really intrigued. Now, like me, I'm going to guess for many of you as you get older, there are kind of bigger life questions, if you will, that we start to ask ourselves. So some questions, for example, that came to mind for me were, how do I really figure out my life's purpose? Yes, I'm a wife and a mom and an educator professionally, but to what end? Another question that came to mind was, if I can really articulate that purpose, how do I begin to craft my day-to-day reality, if you will, to then achieve that purpose? Is my current day-to-day life self-serving, or do I make space for lifting others up by serving them? And then regarding all of that, what am I modeling for my kids, right? And or for the children in my life? So if you've ever asked yourself these questions, you're going to want to keep listening. If you've never asked yourself these questions, you're really going to want to keep listening. So like many of you, I'm sure this probably happens to a lot more than just me. When people recommend books to me, I put it on a list, right? And I kind of keep going because there's a lot of books on that list. And putting a book on my list sometimes then translates into purchasing it and adding it to the stack on my nightstand. And that's exactly what happened with Claudia Chan's book. Some of them end up on, my Kindle or whatever it is. But flash forward then to last December, when I was beginning to really think about this podcast. And it turns out at the same time, Chan's book came up on my stack for reading, and so here we are. I was just so excited to read and see so much of my thinking captured by her. Specifically, and she, by the way, Claudia Chan is a leadership expert, a social entrepreneur, and she focuses on how we shift to a me for we mindset. And you've actually heard me use that expression before. This mindset is about rooting our effort in a mission far bigger than our own personal success, and getting everyone, women, men, young, old, everyone, to work together for social change. So ultimately, the message is that by lifting others, we not only make the world better, but we can also discover our greatest meaning and achieve lasting fulfillment. So episode 4 then of our podcast is a deep dive into Chan's book with a focus on 6 or 7 or so of her 13 pillars. These are foundational habits that she talks about that we can use to achieve a me for we mindset. I love this specifically because it's the first of many deep dives into books that we're going to do over time. Hers is the first because, again, as you've heard me say throughout the first few episodes of this podcast, there's a lot of her work that's kind of influencing the thinking. So in my effort to share learning with you all as an audience, I'll include learnings from key resources that I discover, and we'll certainly look forward to eventually having you recommend key resources that we can explore together. In fact, I would love for you to share a resource that you could find yourself joining me in the conversation about. In other words, gosh, Janice, here's something I think you should really explore, and I'm going to read this, and it's going to be something that, fuels my own learning, and who knows, maybe you could end up co-hosting a conversation with me on this podcast. Speaking of which, joining me today for our conversation is my friend and fellow Faster Way coach, Alicia Brunson. And Alicia's going to talk a little bit about her background, but I asked her to join me because she and I had talked about this book previously, and I knew she had read it. And as always, I want there to be 2 voices, at least, in this conversation. So Alicia's joining us today. Alicia, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
I know it can be a little nerve-wracking, so thank you for taking the leap. And so just start by giving us a little bit about your background, whatever you feel like is relevant, and certainly what brought you to the book, and then we're going to launch into talking about it.
Sure. I am a military spouse, so I've been married to my husband for 21 years, and life in the military is always about changes. Most of the time I've been a stay-at-home mom. I have been a certified personal trainer for almost 15 years. And then the last 2.5 years, I've been a certified Faster Way to Fat Loss coach as well.
Awesome.
We have 2 boys, so teenage boys. Aiden just turned 17 and Cole will be 14 in April.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So, what I love, and Alicia and I were talking about this right before we jumped on, is that, we're just kind of two real people who are taking the learning that we can take from this resource to heart. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the key pieces that we took away from Chan's book, and certainly to some extent, kind of how it's influenced our own thinking, right? So, engaging in just kind of a conversation around it with the hope that some of you will consider going out and reading the whole thing, right? Taking a deeper dive yourself. So, one of the things that I really love about the book is that I feel like Claudia Chan really captures not just the idea of serving others and building a community of problem solvers, but actually how to go about doing it, right? So I want to start with kind of a general sense of the book. So I'm going to pull us to page 19. And so folks, as you're listening, Alicia and I are kind of engaging in a text-based discussion, right? There are going to be parts that we go right to the book for and look at. Sometimes, a lot of times it'll just be our general sense of the things that we remember. But what I love is that right out of the gate, Claudia Chan is making a case for every single one of us having a role in being a community of problem solvers, right? There are small micro issues and large macro issues that are happening in our communities all around us, and that each one of us kind of has to own our responsibility for tackling them. And she really kind of helps us do that by really, I feel like, giving us a good sense of how doable it is, right? That it's not something that somebody else who's better educated than me or a better leader than me or whatever it is has to do, but that we can all have a role. So on page 19, right out of the gate, she talks about one of the biggest reasons that people aren't participating at those macro and micro levels in problem solving in their communities is fear. And she says fear of failure, fear of being criticized, fear of making decisions, and fear of having to take responsibility when things go wrong. So she goes on to say, but what we should be more afraid of is what happens when we don't participate. And this part's really important because she says when you fail to act, you're actually giving up your power and letting others make decisions for you and your families on a public policy level and a personal lifestyle level. For example, things like you're letting others decide your right to get paid for having a child, right? The quality of food served at your kid's school, the corporate culture you work in, the career growth opportunities available to you, and the public safety of your neighborhood. She goes on and on and on, but all of those can kind of grab a hold of us, right? And make us go, oh my gosh, okay, I hadn't thought about it like that, right? Like if I'm not participating in figuring out the solutions, then I'm letting somebody else, and then I have to just kind of go along with their solutions. What did you think about that, Alicia?
Yeah, the one that really stuck with me was the quality of food served at your kid's school. Yeah. It's like rather than being a mom who's going to complain about something and think that it should be done a better way, we have the right to stand up for ourselves and say, I see that this needs to be changed. I can help make a difference. And so therefore we can do something about it, bettering the community, bettering your lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I love that very specific example. And so what she's kind of creating in the first part of the book really is a call to action, right? Like how does she grab each one of us on the different places we are in our life's journey? On page 59, she kind of gets into her leadership piece because she's essentially saying we can all lead a movement, micro or macro, right? Depending on our kind of where we see ourselves fitting into that picture. And at the very beginning of that chapter is a quote by Sheryl Sandberg, who was COO of Facebook and founder of leanin.org. And she says, presenting leadership as a list of carefully defined qualities like strategic, analytical, and performance-oriented no longer holds. Instead, true leadership stems from individuality that is honestly and sometimes imperfectly expressed. Leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection. So a couple of really important things there, but going back to your example, Alicia, about kind of picking out the role of mom and school lunches, right? That you have to kind of own that, right, to some extent, and then of course be thinking in terms of authenticity over perfection.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, if you are the one that sees a problem and something needs to be changed, it is up to us. I feel like otherwise we don't have a right to think how it could be differently. But also think of how this could be your thing. This could be something you're called to do. You have a voice about it, and you can make a difference, which makes a difference for children's children, and continues on. Yeah, absolutely. And she's really kind of getting to and I've said this before on this podcast, there's no magic them waiting to solve all the problems, right? Like the them lies in each one of us, and we each have to kind of feel our way through understanding our piece of that. So then now I'm flashing forward to page 67 because that's great, right? So, and you just said this could be your thing, right? That could be the thing. But I think for a lot of us, and folks, it'll be really interesting for those of you who are inclined to comment on the Facebook page here about this.
I think for a lot of us, yes, she says the obstacle, the main obstacle is fear, but I also think it's the where to start. Like, okay, that sounds great, but how do I figure out what's my thing, right? So on page 67, she actually kind of starts to get at that because she says, start with the group of people you want to help. Think about the region, the industry, or a segment of the population that needs a solution in an area that will benefit from your work. What's the specific or problem or issue that they're experiencing? What's unique about your personal experiences and expertise that will improve their situation in the most cost and time efficient manner? So again, using that same example, some people would think it was really just kind of tiny of school lunches, right? Like if I'm a stay-at-home mom and I have kids, a bunch of kids in school, that could be my area, right? Because maybe I'm the mom who's also the classroom mom and I'm there helping all the time and I'm the person who notices because frankly, we only have one kid left in school. And, she comes home and every once in a while I think to ask her, so what'd you eat for lunch today? And one of the patterns I was finding is goldfish, right? Like, because I'm not there and I'm honestly not paying attention. But if you're the mom who is, just think about the voice you could have for all of us who aren't, right? Yeah, yeah. So then she gets into, thinking in terms of, okay, so you're going to start with a group of people you want to help that you feel like you have some skills where you could contribute it. And she gives us, I think it's like 13 different pillars, right, that we can use to fuel and to build our capacity to help, right, to serve others, to lift others up in this particular area. So I'm going to go to the first one because I think for both of us, when we talked offline, it's the starting point, right? And the very first one is purpose, right? So I'm going to kick us off and then I'm going to be quiet and because I want to hear from you, Alicia. But under purpose, again, the quote right out of the gate at the start of her chapter is that what we really want to do is what we're really meant to do. When we do what we're meant to do, money comes to us, doors open for us, we feel useful, and the work we do feels like play to us. That's by Julia Cameron, who's a teacher and an author. And she says then, Claudia Chan does go ahead and say, purpose can be defined as simply the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. That's kind of a long-term, if you will, definition of purpose. But what I love about is that she goes on and says that what we have to do is try to understand our individual identity within the context of the universe, right? So we've talked about in this podcast the outside in lens, the idea of being able to kind of look at the whole picture and then look at yourself in the context of the whole picture, right? So that helps us begin to think in terms of, instead of what I will get for my life in the world, instead shifting that mindset to what my life means for the world. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that's important to me. What were your thoughts as you were kind of gaining your understanding about what she talked about with purpose?
Yeah, I think when a lot of people are asked what their purpose is, I think a lot of times they automatically think their career or their, what they think how they serve their family in a way, maybe. But I think also your purpose can be something that you are wanting to do, or maybe you're still acting out your purpose. Maybe there's something more in store for you. Because, let's admit, how many of us went to college and actually are using that today? That's changing all the time. Everybody's changing, careers, jobs, whatever. And I feel like, I'll reference the book, page 78. She mentions one of her favorite leadership teachers, she said, Bill Hybels, had his life changed when a mentor asked him, what will you do that will outlive you and all of those earthly accomplishments? So I think it's big to see purpose as more of, kind of like you said, the me for we, but rather than like what I'm gaining for myself, what am I doing in this world to make a difference for other people? And, that also goes into gratitude, other things that we'll talk about in the future. But I really like that because it's also not just what you're doing day in, day out, what you're doing going to work, what your career is, but it's also, who are you making a difference? Who are you making a difference in the lives of, I guess, is what I'm saying. Whether it be even just a mom, I feel like for me, my purpose has often changed. And as I've said, I'm a military spouse. So a lot of times when I feel like in different areas of our life, like when my boys were young, I do feel like my purpose was to be a stay-at-home mom. And I loved it. Yeah. And I thrived with it. Did I want to be a stay-at-home mom forever? No. but I think, I just kind of let, and things change. Then, then we move, we go somewhere else, we do something different. Now, you did mention things that you see, or that you're good at, or you want to reach out to, or the people that you want to help or have a heart for. And I think within this military lifestyle, there have been different leadership positions that I've just been put into because of my husband's role, but I loved it, and having that experience as a military spouse, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to have your husband gone. I know what it's like, to move to a new place and be the new person, the new mom who you don't know anybody, your kids don't have any friends, So I think all of those things, you have to find different purposes within your life. And now, I never ever dreamed that I would be a faster way to fat loss coach. So that's kind of,
Yep.
I think within my life, just different areas of my life, you have a purpose at different times. And I think we can all say that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you tied how your purpose changes to the phase of the life journey that you're in, right? Because like you said, when you're the mom with a couple of little kids, running around, it's all you can do to like serve the purpose of getting dinner on the table, right? And so you can keep it really simple, but serving a higher purpose even in that, because you're not just getting dinner on the table, you're really thinking about nutrition and health for your family and how do I make them better by, fueling their bodies with things that are going to be good for them, etc. And then as you kind of navigate it, and I'll dig a little bit deeper with the military spouse roles that you talked about, because I feel like some of those are critical, right? Because when you're early on in that role, you're kind of trying to keep your head above water, but as you gain experience like you have, right? Because you guys have, it's what, 20 plus years, right? Now in the Navy. Yeah. So as you gain experience, you then gain the capacity to have a higher purpose to serve other military spouses. Like you said, sometimes because you're in those roles, because they come with your husband's leadership role. But we both know that you can end up in that role and not do much with it, right? You are somebody who embraced it and said, okay, this is a calling for me right now, right? This is what I can do right now to serve the community that I'm a part of.
Right.
Yeah, and that was huge. I mean, I got to experience that firsthand, and that was significant. And so what I love about that point from you is we can look around at any part of regardless of what phase of the journey we're in, right? And find a purpose to serve outside ourselves. And I think that is, kind of ultimately the message, right? That the community and the world gets better when we each are constantly striving for the purpose we serve outside ourselves. Now, I know at our age, well, I'll speak for myself. I'm a few years older than you. So at my age, I don't want to age you. Certainly I feel like now that most of our kids are not school aged anymore, you have more time to focus on yourself and to focus on kind of your thoughts and your beliefs and your values and all those things. One of the things that, so I think that everybody listening, right, regardless of what phase you're in, right, that's the thing to do, is kind of stop and be thinking about that. The author gives us another starting point, which really struck me, because she encourages us in our search for that larger purpose, whatever it is, right, at this phase in the journey, to begin with our own struggles. And she actually talks about, how your struggles can lead you to understanding that you actually have a greater capacity to help others in a certain realm. So I'm not going to go too deep into my own stuff, but as an example, I'll say that hits me because I do this. So I am completely disassociated with my biological family. And like I said, I'm not going deeper into that, not in this episode, maybe in episode 250. But I'm completely disassociated with them. And I say biological family, that's an important expression for me, because certainly I have learned over my life that family means a lot more than blood, right? There are a lot of different kinds of family. And I had to come to terms years ago with the idea that I can't help them, right? Like there are many of them who I'm aware of that I kind of keep track of, and who could use, quite frankly, some of the things that I do for others. And so what I've endeavored to kind of accept is that I think what I do is I work so hard to help the people in my life and around me, and to do things that are going to serve others, because I think I hope that, from a karma perspective, what will happen is like, then there'll be people who end up in their lives who can help them, right? So I can serve the people I can serve, but other people will serve them. And so that, using that as an example of, consider your own struggles, right? Over time, where have been the areas what is the, trauma you've experienced? What are the heartaches you've experienced, etc., that have given you a capacity to serve others that, others might not have, right? So I think that's a really important piece of that purpose piece. Mm-hmm. She goes on to, on page 83, And actually, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm remembering I marked this because she gives you four questions to consider. And so the questions she says that you could consider to help you discover your purpose are: what have been some of the most painful events and circumstances of my life? How did I overcome and conquer the situation? How does it still affect me? Did it make me a stronger person? And how did it shape me into the person I am today, right? I think those are really deep reflection points. What are you thinking, Alicia?
Yeah, and even just the page before on 82 at the top, she says, often for so many, myself included, it is our greatest pain that can lead us to our purpose. So, individuals that go through a challenge or a hard time, I believe, they learn from it, they grow from it, and therefore they're so much more capable of helping others going through that same thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And, I think what's revealing about her hitting it on the head that way is that lots of times we want to, we want to bury that stuff. You want to bury the stuff that was, hurtful or harmful or whatever. And I really appreciate that she's like, no, you could leverage it, right? You can turn it into something that could very much lift others up and serve others.
Right.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're not the only one struggling with it
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah,
But
that's
in
huge.
turn, by going through it and growing, you are able to help others.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What a great example, right? When you think in terms of how you make the community around you better. So, with each of the pillars, too, just for the folks who are listening, she structures the book. So, with each of the 13 pillars, the very last thing she does is give you homework, which I thought was great. Now, I did not do all of it, but I did read it. And so, for example, in the area of purpose, she gives you homework. She gives you questions to ponder. Maybe you could journal it or whatever works best for you. But and some questions that she gives you to think about are: what will you do on this planet with the gifts, talents, and experiences you were given? What is your purpose in the personal realm and the social realm? Look at your life. And in this case, she says, from God's perspective, what do you think you're on this earth for? Be as specific as possible. And she goes on to offer some others. So, when I introduced this podcast back in episode 1, I had a couple of friends who gave me feedback and they said, gosh, I'm really looking forward to talking a little bit more about purpose. So this, I think, is a really great way to just give you some reflection points to think about that. So with that in mind, Alicia, I'm going to turn to you now and say, why don't we, this is probably a good time with the transition of the question when she said kind of what do you think God's potential is for you, to talk about the faith pillar. So one of the 13 pillars that Claudia Chan offers us is faith. So why don't you jump in on and give us some thoughts about that one?
Sure. Well, for me personally, I know she kind of talks about in the book, people believe different things, so whatever their faith is.
Yeah.
Mine is Christian faith. I was raised in a Christian home and, have made the Lord the center of my life. And, she does reference a lot of times, just as even simple faith. She says in page 100, it says, I find that often people can be disappointed with the outcomes they receive because they cling to the idea that they can wield total control over their futures. So way at the beginning, I believe, my marriage, we've moved many times, raising children, we're not in control, and I think the sooner that we realize, and she also says the stronger the faith, the less you worry. Mm-hmm. There are so many things I could be worrying about, and it's like we live in one location for a couple of years and then we move somewhere else. And, various people have talked to me and they're like, well, you don't know where you're going to be. And I'm like, no, I don't know where we're going to be next, but I know who's in control. And I know that I have faith that it'll all be okay and it'll all work out,
Yeah. It's incredibly comforting.
Yeah. And that's kind of the aspect from the military lifestyle. So it's, I can worry about it. I can stress about it. We're about to have another move and it'll be my son's third high school. So there are definitely things I could be worrying about or I could be stressing over. However, I don't really have control over them. So to make my life peaceful now and a little bit less stressed, mm-hmm. I have to give that up to the Lord and say, I'm not in control. I just have to trust that, wherever we go next is all in God's plan. And, there's a purpose for us there. Bringing back to purpose again,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And just have to have faith and believe in that.
Well, and I love that she talks about faith in terms of purpose, right? Like she connects all the pillars, of course. She connects all of them. On page 101, there's a quote that I noted where she says, "You can become only what you believe, so your power to believe is your greatest power." And I love that because it can be taken a couple of ways. It certainly can be taken through the lens that you were just talking about, right? Like the more I believe in God or whatever my spiritual leaning is, the greater my potential is, right? And it can also be as simple as the more I just believe in myself, right? That the more I can achieve because I just have a faith in myself. So I feel like she is really effective at talking about faith in a lot of different ways.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you feel like you get when you tell people when people say to you, gosh, you don't even know where you're going to be. How can you function like that or whatever? And you give that response. How do you feel like what's the response you typically get back? And you know what I mean? Like how do you make people understand your faith?
I mean, I think it's hard because a lot of people say, "Oh, I just couldn't do that. If I
Yeah,
didn't know where I was going to be moving,
yeah,
I don't know what I would do." And I mean, and I do think, I don't think the military lifestyle is for everyone. And I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I was getting into either. But way back on the faith thing, now here we are, 21 years later.
yep,
So, but so and maybe a personality thing as well.
yeah,
I feel like I have been a little bit more of a laid back person, go with
sure,
the flow, because I've learned.
yeah,
I think early on, and maybe I was a little bit more maybe type A personality, and I had my lists. I still have lists, but there of the things. Maybe it's a better description of I know what things I have a little bit more control over
sure.
now, but then obviously there are still things that I do not have any control over. So it's kind of just surrendering and giving that faith and just letting it be and being okay with that.
Yeah. I like the balance of if you have that faith and you trust, right, then there's really not a bad choice. Like you're not it's not, gosh, if we don't go here, for example, with your next duty station, then oh my gosh, it's going to be so much worth. But trusting that no matter where you go, that like you said, there's going to be a purpose for you there, right? And there's going to be ways for you to grow and ways for you to contribute there. I think that's really important. And in my profession, we talk about control and authority a lot when we think in terms of education and circumstances and how we're trying to help all kids achieve. And oftentimes, I mean, certainly we're not bringing faith into that conversation, but we are talking about this idea of really recognizing what you can and can't control, what you can and can't influence, and being okay with the stuff you can't, right? And focusing on then what I can, right? What can I control? What can I influence? So that I can make it the best it can be or whatever it is. And in your case, I feel like even with the stuff that you're just kind of like you in your words, surrender and control, then, whenever the decisions are made, you're going to make the best of it, right? Like what is your job is to make the best of it.
Yeah,
Is that
there's
about
less
right?
disappointments if you're setting your expectations lower.
Yeah, well, that's true, right? And there's a balance there too, and I feel like she kind of gets at that a little bit in the narrative. So just like with purpose, the last part of faith, she gives a little bit of homework, and she again says, think about some questions to reflect on. Where do you have the most scarcity in your life and need to build more faith? What goals have you set in motion already and now need to kind of surrender all concerns to? What fears can you replace with faith? So those are some great things for folks as they're thinking about the faith pillar to lean in on, right? And give some consideration to. From there, we're going to go into gratitude. So this is our third pillar that we're going to look at. And what I love about gratitude is there are so many there's so much I'm reading now where there's so much agreement on this idea of gratitude, right? The research that shows that if you actually deliberately take time every day to demonstrate gratitude about something, that it's actually good for your physical health, right? That's kind of incredible when you think about that. So give us a little bit of your thinking around some of the stuff that she offers us around gratitude.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like, I think, I mean, she does also say, are you a cup empty or is
Mm-hmm.
your glass half full or half empty?
Right,
I
right.
think really, though, that simple question can really tell a lot about us, I believe, because in every situation, you're either going to be optimistic about it or you're going to be a little bit more pessimistic about it. Recently in one of our sermons at church, the pastor was talking about, do you assume the worst or do you believe the best? So it's kind of like every situation we have that choice.
Yep.
And, it's whether the sun is going to be shining or is your rain going to be,
Exactly.
I think it's our outlook on so many different things, how our day is going, how we make decisions, how your attitude with your family, your attitude towards your coworkers, anybody you see in the store. I think there's so many things like you. I've listened to a few podcasts recently all about gratitude, and there are things that you can do, just getting in the habit of, and it might sound silly, like your daily mantras in the morning or your daily affirmations that you might say in the morning. But I think practicing those things daily really puts you in a better mood, puts other people in a better mood around you. Claudia does say on page 147, she says, if you focus on all the ways you have been blessed and lucky, you will get more of the good stuff. So it's just kind of just the whole outlook, and even with my boys, I try to, instill that into them. Like, we need to find joy in doing this. And one of those things I do think how we feel gratitude and more grateful is just doing things for others, which, doing things for others and having them realize, oh, that was very kind of you, or, that you cared to do that for me. That makes you more gracious. I mean, there's, I like, all of what she says about gratitude and different things. And one little thing that I listened to on a podcast was about, kind of like you said, the daily affirmations, the things you tell yourself. There are all these little habits, journaling, everything you can do. One example I heard is putting a coin in your shoe, which I thought sounded strange.
Okay.
But when you have a coin in your shoe, you notice it, or like a little rock in your shoe, you notice it. But they do that on purpose, thinking every time you feel that coin in your shoe, you should be thankful. I mean, it's just
interesting.
Small.
Yeah.
There were a lot of different things that I had heard recently, but that was one that's like a definite. Not a painful, but it's just a little bit of it uncomfortable enough to remind you, oh yes, let's be grateful today, or let's have gratitude.
Yeah, I appreciate your pointing out. Okay, it shouldn't be painful, right? It shouldn't be like a spike in your shoe, and now every time it hurts, you're like, wait a second. No, but what I love about that is she uses the term. She says practice radical gratitude daily, and you're giving examples of that, right? Carrying the coin in your shoe so that when you feel it, it's a reminder. Some of the mantras that were, and I'm always like, sorry, not sorry when we get touchy feely, right? Because I know there are people who will be like, I'm not going to stand in front of a mirror and tell myself how awesome I am, right? Like. But the psychology is there and the research is there to back it up that, and I know for some, I mean, personally speaking, like you do that the first few times and it feels really awkward and it feels really superficial, but you keep doing it long enough and it's amazing how, like you said, just kind of that feeling of like well-being will wash over you, right? She says right out of the gate about gratitude, this great quote from Eckhart Tolle, and it says, acknowledging the good that you already have in your life is the foundation for all abundance. And it kind of ties into, in gratitude, she talks about a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. And that idea that if we have a choice, right? We can focus on what we have, or we can focus on what we don't have. And that if you focus on what you have, it's amazing how uplifting it is, not just for you, but the people around you. Because if you're the person in the crowd who's constantly complaining about not having this or not having the best that, or that kind of speaks to energy, which we're going to talk about next. But that has a negative impact on the people around you as well, right? So focusing on what we do have is significant. And I remember my personal example with that is when the kids were in middle school, right? Especially, I'll speak to Montana and Sid because they'll love that I said their names. They won't be mortified at all. And because of being in middle school kind of alongside them. And it's true for our youngest now as well. But there would be days where you pick them up and it's like all they do is rage, right? Like they're just ranting about everything that was wrong with that day, from what they were wearing to what the teachers did to what their friends did, whatever. And the rule was, okay, now you have to spend 5 minutes just talking about the good stuff, right? And I didn't count it in terms of let's talk about what we're grateful for. Just you have to talk about the good stuff right now, like for 5 minutes. Because even though sometimes it was just them like literally like a robot, like responding because I made them. The fact is that by the end of it, they've let go of some of that negative, right? They've let go of some of that scarcity stuff. And now they're focused more on abundance, even though they didn't realize that's what they were doing. So there's so much psychology, I think, to that makes it really important.
Yeah, and I think even like one thing we used to do is at the dinner table, you kind of ask as far as kids, raising kids, but
Yeah.
getting them same type of thing, rather than complaining about all the bad things that happened to your day, because we all have lists of those.
Oh, yeah.
But then in turn asking them, the same type of question. Okay, what was the best part of your day? Share with me something good that happened.
Yeah.
So that obviously gets them to be thinking more on the positive, or, thinking back through their day of how, something that was a good thing about their day. Before my boys would leave for school, when they were younger, I would say, okay, think of how you can serve somebody today.
Yeah.
And I would follow up with them after school, and maybe Cole held the door open for somebody.
Love
or,
it.
a friend dropped their binder and I went over to help them pick it up. I mean, even the little things, but instilling those into our kids to continue. Kids can be mean nowadays.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just having some kids be the positive, or kids doing the positive. Maybe you've heard the saying too about build a longer table, not a higher fence.
Yes.
And I love that too. It's like, no matter what you have, even if you think you want more, or one, be grateful with what you have, but then also share with others.
Yeah.
And why not?
That's exactly right. And I'm a big believer in her, idea that the more you give, right, the more you get back. And I've always felt that way, right? I'm always about like, you get back what you put out there. And if what you put out there is positive and giving and lifting, as you said, that's what you're going to get back. Not that you're doing those things to get anything back, but that is, time and time again, every single day I can think of examples of that. And I love the small examples that you gave of how your boys would think about how they served others, and without you pointing it out, they might not even realize that, you know what I mean? They might not think about it in those terms, that it doesn't have to be big, it can be everyday stuff. And I remember recently, you said kids can be mean, and they can, so can adults. And I remember recently like being in a grocery store parking lot, and seeing a mom and her like elementary age daughter, and she was like struggling with the cart, and you could tell she was just really stressed out or whatever. And so I walked over to, because I was going, I just put my cart away and I was going, and I said, do you want me to take your cart for you? And she kind of looked at me like, are you going to mug me? Right? Like, is this the beginning of a bad episode of CSI? Like, what's happening? And or Criminal Minds or whatever. And I just said, no, I'm going anyway, right? And so she was like, well, sure, and I took it and I just walked it back up to the store. And as I was coming back, she was still sitting there with her daughter, and she leaned out the window and she said, thank you so much. And my daughter says thank you too. Like, that small little thing, which it's not that it shouldn't have made a big difference, but it was kind of disappointing how big of a difference it made. Does that make sense? Because it's like, on one hand, I was so glad that it made a big difference, but on the other hand, I thought, what have we been reduced to if just the smallest gesture makes people kind of go, whoa, like I wasn't expecting anything good, let alone somebody to do something for me,
Yeah, like, why aren't we doing more of that?
Yes, yes. And if you do enough of the small stuff, you hold the door, you help them pick up the binder, the whole thing, then all of a sudden it's like, gosh, if we can just make those things the given, right, that they're automatically going to happen, can you imagine what we can do bigger than that, right? Because the little stuff's taken care of. So in gratitude, the homework she offers us is thinking about things like, and you said this already, do you typically see the world from a glass half full or glass half empty mindset? And why? I love that. Not just do you or don't you, but why, right? And what things in your life do you take for granted and need to practice more gratitude for? And then she starts to give some more examples, kind of like we've done already, to think in terms of, practicing radical daily gratitude, right? So I love that, and I feel like that's a piece that just kind of crosses over everything that we do. All right, let's shift. I want to shift into energy. So she talks about energy as one of her pillars, and it really kind of it ties. It's amazing how much all of these blend together, right? So she kicks that off with a quote in the very beginning of the chapter, where she says, "Part of sensing energy is hearing the messages around you. You're like a radio that can receive many stations. What you receive depends on what you pay attention to. So that really struck me because, it's amazing to me. I love how all of these different readings and stuff just tie together. But probably a year ago, I read Sean Akers' book on called The Happiness Advantage. And one of the things he talked about was, and it's kind of like her glass half full, glass half empty, right? Part of the way I know I'm a half full person is because I notice positive stuff before I notice negative stuff. And I think that people who tend to be glass half empty probably notice the negative stuff first, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do. I definitely think you're right.
Yeah.
I think if you already have this negative mindset, you're going to be complaining more automatically. You will be seeing the negative more. You will be seeing it's more disappointing, and I think just more a down in the dumps attitude. Like nobody likes that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it kind of grows into the more negative I see and allow myself to pay attention to, then I'm going to express less gratitude. Then, right? I mean, it all kind of ties together. So she talks about energy being the invisible messages that flow around us, through us, in us, out of us, between us, etc. And she gives some specific examples, and this is why I decided I wanted to do this pillar out of the 13, because I thought this was really important. Because quite frankly, I feel like it gives us the tools to call ourselves out, right? Like as we're doing our own self-reflection about, where do we fall in the realm of all of this stuff, right? So she talks about obviously negative energy and positive energy. We've already kind of talked about that. But here are some examples of negative energy that I think, again, hopefully by giving some language to it, people can really do their own self-assessment. So one example would be self-absorbed energy. So she talks about this in terms of the friend, right? This is the friend who saps your energy every time you see her or him because they're so consumed by their own goals, drama, or circumstances that they spend most of the conversation they have with you telling you what's happening about them, right? And they're pretty disinterested in what's happening with you because that's not particularly important. Also negative and complaining energy, that probably speaks for itself a little bit more. That's the friend who's always complaining about something. Serious energy is the friend who literally never cracks a smile, right? Like it's always, which I found interesting because perhaps you don't think about yourself as a negative energy if you're just serious all the time. Maybe you think about yourself as kind of middle of the road. Judgmental and critical energy, of course. Arrogant energy, I really appreciate that she called that out. And then the flip side, the positive energy, right? So for example, she talks about loving energy, right? The people who always ask questions about how you're doing, they want to hear what's happening with you. That if they have a strong faith, they're always praying for you, those kinds of things. Empowering energy, I really loved. You can turn to these people when you feel like you have a problem that you're stuck with, and they're going to help you figure out a solution, right? They're not just going to take care of you, but they're going to empower you to find a solution. And she goes through some others. Were there any others types of energy that you wanted to make sure that we landed on?
No, I mean, I love all her examples. The thing, even since we just came back from the gratitude pillar,
yeah,
I mean, not really referring back to it, but you can even see within the energy pillar,
yeah,
is, why are there negative energies? It's kind of like, and the positive ones, if you're doing things for others and if you're, showing more gratefulness, then it's going to be more of a positive energy. I mean, it is interesting just how they all wrap together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you can't think of one in isolation. They're not compartmentalized, right? They all definitely intertwine with each other. She does say, let's see, this is the other thing I felt like was really important for her to say two things. On 119, she says, you have to be accountable for your own energy and what you project onto other people, right? And I thought that was really important because I feel like, and then she goes on to say the second thing is, and you do that through kind of your own self-assessment, right? Like even checking yourself. I just spent 2 hours with a friend of mine checking myself afterwards. Okay, so what did we talk about? What did I talk about? How did I drive the conversation? Did I demonstrate interest in her? Did I ask her questions about herself, right? Like that's the way we can engage in kind of a self-assessment because we have what we think that we're putting out there and then what's real about what we're putting out there. And then if you're really brave, and I can't remember if she says this, if this is just my own addition to it, but if we're really brave, then asking the people we're closest to, right? Like asking, okay, if, and you could even use the book, right? Gosh, I'm reading about negative and positive energy. Where do I fall in that? And then she also says, you have to take care of yourself. And I love this part because I practice this part. And that is that when you're with people, who are falling too much on the negative energy side. You have to take care of yourself, right? And you can do that by excusing yourself from the conversation. You can do that by just kind of wrapping up the conversation to get out of it. You can do that by, and I have a couple of friends with whom, I feel like we've established a bond where we can do this with each other, right? Where we can kind of say, you know what, you're really killing my vibe right now. Like, we're going to have to change the subject or something, right? Because it's so downer. And even the thing I mentioned with the girls. What about you? What are you thinking about with respect to especially being able to kind of take care of your own energy or your own self?
Yeah, I like those. And just knowing, kind of like you, what boosts you or gives you the energy. If you're with that person that has the kind of more negative energy, you might have to work a little bit harder to bring out the positives. Or
Yep.
but that's also helpful.
Yeah.
Rather than, because sometimes the people that are giving off that negative energy, they just want someone to be on their side.
Yeah.
And really, if they're confiding in you over a certain situation or a subject, or if you're with them in conversation, I think it is a little bit more of our responsibility to help that person out and to give that positive.
Yeah.
And to be that positive, be that cup of half full,
Absolutely.
for that person. Don't let them drag you down, but kind of turn around the conversation just so they are able to see the positive as well.
Yeah.
A little bit more positive energy.
No, I love that. And it kind of speaks to like depth of relationships, right? I mean, obviously we have superficial relationships, we have friendships, we have kind of colleague friends, we have family, there's different depths of relationship. And frankly, again, going back to the family piece, just because it's family doesn't mean it's not superficial, right? So really kind of judging the quality, and she gets into this when she talks about community, which we're not going to deep dive into in this podcast, but judging kind of the quality of those relationships, and as a result of them, what's important, like where are you going to invest your time, right? What I love about what you said is, we kind of have to invest our time, right? We have to invest in other people enough to, as you said, steer the conversation differently, helping them see the positive, helping them kind of come over to the whole glass half full side of the world, right? We don't want to just abandon everybody who's not positive or who's, what have you, because part of how we lift other people up is helping them see all of those things. But she does talk about then, ultimately you have to think about, you only have a finite amount of time, and you have to decide about that time, like who you're going to spend it with and how you're going to use that time, right? And that can mean in some cases not every friendship carries on, right? Not every, you don't always have time for every single person. You kind of have to think about how you're going to commit it, which is kind of interesting. So she wraps up energy with a couple of questions like, which people in your life boost and inspire your energy? Which people in your life deplete your energy? I'm envisioning like people with a yellow legal pad with a plus and minus. You know who they are. Just list them, right? Go ahead and be accurate about it. But what I love about that is potentially you make that list that you then burn, of course. You don't show anybody. It's a great way to then do your own self-assessment, right? Like, who of these people on which side of the list do I feel like I'm more like, right? Because sometimes it's harder to be that honest with ourselves. And then she says, how can you proactively design your life to spend more time with the people who give off positive energy, right? So that's definitely a piece of that. The last pillar we're going to talk about, and it's actually a combination of two. She talks about resilience and self-love, and I wanted to make sure we touched on both of them because, again, it's about building your own capacity in both of those areas. And I think what I'm going to do for the sake of time is just make a couple of points. And then again, Alicia, I want to hear your thoughts about those, what struck you about those. But she talks about, first off, under the area of resiliency, she talks about reframing your relationship with obstacles to see them as your best teacher. And I think that's an incredibly important part because obviously anytime you're going to go out to do anything, whether it's to serve yourself or serve others, as we're focusing on today, you're going to run into obstacles, right? You're going to, if I consider this podcast as a way of serving others, I ran into some major obstacles, right? Like, how the heck do I use GarageBand? What do you mean I need something to upload it into YouTube? I don't even know what that means, right? What the heck is an MP3 file? Whatever it is, right? You're going to run into obstacles, but, your choices are let them be the reason you stop, or look at them, see them as teachers, right? Okay, what can I learn from this? How can I gain from this? What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just like that, even, the Bible talks about that refining process.
Yeah.
So anytime we go through something, and her Chinese proverb that she mentions at the beginning says, the gem cannot be polished without friction, nor man perfected without trials.
Yeah.
It's true. Going through an experience, you gain experience, you gain, when you come out from the other side of it, you gain knowledge on how to get through it, how to help others. And yeah, I think, if we go through life without any challenges or obstacles, then we don't have as much to share with others, or, so I agree. I like that.
I think you're right. And I think when you work hard to support and lift others up, a part of what the value they find in you is your experiences and how you were able to, achieve something or overcome an obstacle, right? That maybe is similar to what they're facing, and you're proof that it can be done. She talks about she uses a great term. So I'm very familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, as many of us probably are, if not all of us. But she uses the term post-traumatic growth, and this again ties into that book, The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker, because he shares similar research, and that's the research that trauma is awful, and most of us will experience it at some point in our life, almost all of us, if not all of us. And that the difference between the positive energy, the negative energy, being able to express gratitude, all those things, sometimes is about what growth you can experience as a result of the trauma. And I want to be careful with that, because certainly if somebody's listening to this right now and has just recently experienced trauma, the last thing I'm guessing they want to hear right now is about thinking in terms of growth. But over time, being able to look back on an experience and figure out growth from it. And some examples she gives, and he gave as well in his book, they used cancer survivors as examples, right? People who went through and beat cancer and the things that they feel like they gained as a result of having going through. She quotes a study of about 600 people that found that those who reported positive changes also noted other surprising improvements: stronger relationships, more compassion for others, greater wisdom, self-acceptance, less materialism, renewed spirituality, etc., as a result of having gone through some kind of a trauma. So again, that general idea that experiencing those things can make us better. I mean, we have to give ourselves time to heal, but they can make us better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the last piece on resilience that she says that I thought was really important is on page 111. And she talks about maturity. And she says maturity is the ability to delay pleasure in the service of a long-term goal. And she gives an example of a Stanford study where they did a marshmallow test. People have heard similar studies before, where like you get a group of kids and and you tell them you can either eat one marshmallow now, or you can wait 3 minutes and you can have 3 marshmallows or whatever, right? And so they did that, but they followed up years later and they found that the kids who chose to wait and get more also had kind of consistently across them had different levels of success as adults. So for example, they had higher SAT scores, lower body mass indexes 30 years after the study. That basically what the study showed is that cultivating willpower early has demonstrated benefits across our life, which was kind of cool.
It's almost like they see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Rather than that impulsive, what can I get right now?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the benefit of that, right? So again, I think about our children, and I think, really, how do we teach our children, right? That if you wait, that it could be better. Yeah, exactly. So figuring that out. And then from a homework perspective, to be consistent over resilient, she says, think about the challenges you faced. Looking back, how might they have protected you, matured you, built to strengthen you, etc. And then the last one we were going to touch on is the challenge, or the pillar rather, of self-love. And so again, kind of like I've done with the others, in her jump off for that pillar, she has a quote from Marianne Williamson, who's a spiritual teacher and author. And it says, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? And she goes on to, reference God and some other things there. But I have heard that quote before, and I think that's so important, right? Because I think that we spend a lot of time getting caught in the loop of, I'm not good enough, right? Yeah. What do you think? And what are some of your experiences there?
Yeah, I agree. Or who am I to be, this successful person? Or why, it's almost kind of like that dreaming big mentality. Like, you can, like, who, don't let anyone tell you that you can't. But also, I think especially for women, I was thinking, we have, or that we're taught, that you can't do that, or you have this lower self-esteem, or they're not confident enough to actually, you know, be that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we actually spend a lot of time talking about that, I feel like, in our faster way roles, right? Like talking, because many of our clients are women, not all of them, but this idea that self-care is so critical, that you have to give yourself permission to take care of yourself. And she uses, we're talking, and Claudia's reference self-love, but I certainly look at them as very similar, if not the same. And she talks about the fact that we have to deliberately remind ourselves that self-care isn't a selfish act, that it's simply good stewardship. In fact, that if I don't engage in self-care and self-love, then I can't be the best resource to the people around me, right? So if you have to like twist it around in your mind, you can convince yourself that I have to do this if I want to be the best, caregiver, if you will, versus thinking, oh no, by doing this thing, I'm taking away from the people I serve.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think a lot of times, I mean, self-love does get a lot of different, I don't know, definitions maybe
Yeah.
in our world today.
Yeah.
I don't think, some people might hear self-love or self-care and they're thinking, oh, a full day at the spa.
Right.
And really, I mean, sometimes it could just be a quiet 30 minutes of your day before the day starts and everybody else in the house wakes up.
Yeah.
Or, maybe it's just going for a walk.
Yeah.
One, you're getting exercise, you're getting sunshine, vitamin D, and, a little bit of exercise. But I completely agree, and that's kind of what I use a lot of times in my, in the faster way, is that you do need to take care of yourself. Because I do think we can't effectively give to others if we're sick or tired or low on energy or not feeling our best, so I completely agree.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we talk about, of course, nutrition and exercise are probably some of the simplest forms, if you will, of self-love, right? The stuff that all of us can do every single day, and that if we don't do them, to your point, then we're going to get ourselves run down, and then kind of where are we going to be as far as being a resource? She also talks about knowing your self-love adversary. So like, what negative patterns do you engage in that drain your battery? And specifically on page 169, she talks about guilt. And so I'm going to read a couple of these because I feel like I want our people who are listening to ask themselves, like, do you do this to yourself? At the end of the day, do you focus on what you didn't get done instead of celebrating what you did achieve? Do you give yourself a hard time when you leave work early to spend time with your family? Do you berate yourself if you stay at work late instead of spending time with your family? When you need some pampering, say a spa treatment or whatever it is, do you think first of, oh my gosh, we can't afford that, or oh my goodness, that I can't put that on us, or what have you? I think those are really important gut checks, right? Because I think we're all guilty of that. I think that, and I think you're right. I think women especially, right, are guilty of kind of going to those things. So tying them, kind of like you said, Alicia, already, to all the other pillars, right? Like, if I take a moment to think about gratitude every day, in that, then hopefully I'm undoing some of the negative talk, if you will, that I would normally do, which kind of seems to be a pattern, I think, for a lot of us. So recognizing those negative pieces is going to be an important piece then to engage in self-love. And she even does say, and it's you could say that spending a day at the spa is frivolous if it's purposeless, right? But she says, how you engage in self-love is all about how you're building yourself up so that you can then do the we part of the me for we mindset. I have a friend who knits, and she starts every morning early knitting, and I look at that as a form of self-care for herself, even though she's always knitting stuff for other people, right? But it's her calm place, it's her happy place, and so she makes sure she engages in that first thing every morning, right? That's just one example. You gave examples of exercise and taking a walk and getting the sunshine and all that stuff. So the last piece then there is, I'm just going to read a quick quote at the end of the self-love piece and then the homework. She says, I am worth it because I have so much important work to do in order to fulfill my purpose. So she basically is saying, when you're going to engage in something that's self-care, and you're waffling and you're trying to convince yourself you shouldn't because you have 500 other things to do, to remind yourself that I am worth it because I have so much important work to do in order to fulfill my purpose. And some homework is then, of course, what does self-love look like for you? What do you typically need from an emotional, physical, and mental standpoint? What do you crave or need to recharge, etc.? So those are some ways to think about it. So those are, folks, just 6 or 7 of the 13 pillars that Claudia Chan offers us. And you could hear from our conversation that really they all kind of blend together. So understanding all of them is a really critical point. So with that, certainly I'll encourage you to do that. But I think, Alicia, what I would love to do now is, one of the takeaways that I think is really important, and then I'm going to give you the final word, is that Claudia talks about leading from where you are, or you'll never start. This idea that if I keep waiting for, oh, if I just get this, if I wait until I have this much money, or I have this job, or I have, my kids are out of elementary school, so I have more time, there's always going to be a reason to wait. And you actually really did a great job of demonstrating this early in our conversation when you said, if I'm at the phase in my life where I'm the stay-at-home mom with the kids in school, right? Her message is lead from where you are then, right? That specific place, or you'll never start. So final word, my friend.
Okay.
The pressure's on.
Yes, but that completely brings me back to, I remember those days, baby and a toddler. And, maybe my purpose at that time was to be a light to other moms, other moms maybe struggling at home, maybe postpartum depression, or maybe thinking what is their value or what is their purpose in their life, because, raising kids is hard.
Yeah.
Having a husband gone while you raise kids is harder.
Exactly.
But kind of finding that purpose where you are and running with it and being thankful for that time as well, having gratitude, there were different times where even just different moms groups, and being that cup half full, to other moms, as you can see, all of these tie in. So it's kind of like, I knew that wasn't going to be my life forever, but in that of my life, that's what, and once you realize that that's your purpose, and maybe you're doing something now that you're struggling through and you're not happy with and you want to make a change, I would say don't let any doors close. Continue to look for options, continue doing what you're doing, being thankful for maybe the career or the job you have right now, but keep dreaming or keep working towards goals. I think we should always be having more goals of, what you want to do, or if you have a big dream that you want to go for, or a bigger goal, those hairy, audacious goals that they talk about.
Right.
So there's always room for growth.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much, Alicia. I really do appreciate the fact that you took the leap and you joined us in the conversation. Thank you for being a part of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, folks, one more time. The book is How We Rise by Claudia Chan. I want to thank my friend Alicia Brunson again for joining the conversation today. I really appreciate that, Alicia, and all of your insights. All of the learning in Chan's book driving toward building our capacity to lead change in the world, as well as to understand how to practically pursue our purpose based on where we are right at this moment. Now, let me be very clear. I know it's easy to think in terms of lead change in the world as so huge that we let ourselves off the hook, right? So I want you to think about that in much more micro terms. I'm thinking about the world as in my family, in my local community, maybe in my church community, maybe in my school community, the stuff that's closest to me, with the understanding that if we're each leading change in those micro levels, we are absolutely going to have a big effect on that macro level of the kind of whole worldwide stage. To do this, Chan says that we should think about our life as a business, right? She says if we were treating our life like a company we were leading, we wouldn't let any of the realms falter. We would give the necessary attention to each facet, each department, each realm, understanding that all of them work together to achieve the greater purpose. So today we dove into 6 or 7 of her 13 pillars on how to do this. All of them are designed then to help us achieve our goals in the 8 realms that this podcast covered. And remember, as a quick review, we've introduced those realms as personal well-being and health, marriage and intimate life partnerships, children and parenting, career and vocation, purpose and social impact, financial well-being, social community and other close relationships, as well as physical home and living foundation. And you're going to see over time, guys, we're going to spend more time in some of those than others, but it's all going to be kind of the natural ebb and flow of our conversation. Of course, we encourage you to pick up the book for yourself, do your own deeper dive, and we would love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your questions based on either this podcast conversation or your own deeper dive into Claudia Chan's book. Next week, episode 5, we are going to return to the children and parenting realm to explore just how we go about setting boundaries for our kids. How much structure is too much? How do we combat the pressure of other parenting styles, like those of your kids' friends when they're not quite aligned to your own? And just how we go about supporting our kids in understanding that no actually means no, and why it's important that they do. I totally bet I got your attention on that one. I especially appreciate that we'll be expanding the conversation to include any of the kiddos in your life, not just your own children, but we all have influence over a lot of kids in our lives and how we think in terms of our role with them based on those different ways that we interact with them. And surprise, if you loved my guest, Melissa Ellis from episode 3, you'll be thrilled to know that she's joining me again for this conversation. It's my hope, frankly, that she's going to become a regular part of our conversation and the learning. So hint, hint, Melissa. So tune in next week, everybody, for episode 5, and we'll get to it.